Did you know that there are over 25,000 islands in the South Pacific? Yes, there are more islands other than just Hawaii and Fiji. For my identity speech, I want to talk about my racial identity, which is Pacific Islander, and my ethnicity, which is Tongan. Now, being Pacific Islander, I've experienced that race and ethnicity in the Pacific Islander community can be extremely divisive for Pacific peoples. And this is because of things like interpolation, which causes folks of the Pacific Islander community to forfeit who they are and ascribe to cultural identities other than their own. And then there's privilege, because many Pacific Islanders born in America are not usually aware of the privilege they hold being American born or being a descent of a majority in the Pacific. And so I chose this topic because racial and ethnic identity markers have definitely been putting a wedge between Pacific peoples. As we all know, it is mainly here in the US where we are constantly required to identify ourselves in terms of our race. Until recently, there has never been an option for Pacific Islanders to identify as when it came to official paperwork. So, one way that we have identified ourselves was either as Polynesian, Micronesian, and Melanesian. And these are identifying markers that have been used to describe who we are in relation to where we come from in the Pacific. And so in the US, the majority of the Pacific Islanders here are mostly from Polynesia. Polynesia mainly consisting of Tonga, Samoa, Hawaii, Aotearoa or New Zealand, and Tahiti. And because of this, there are many people from other islands outside of Polynesia who are getting ignored. And this is where interpolation plays a factor in the misuse of ethnicity and race, because when there are Pacific peoples who are a descendant of a culture that is the minority in the Pacific, they are left with very few options that America or American pop culture has to offer. Growing up for myself, personally, as a Tongan, it was difficult because no one knew where Tonga was, but everyone knew where Hawaii was, and everyone knew who Hawaiian people were. And so for almost up until I got into high school, I was Hawaiian. It was just easier that way. Now that there are more and more people becoming more familiar with Polynesians, there are many other people from other regions in the Pacific that are having to ascribe to Polynesian culture. And this might not seem as a bad thing. Of course, being from the Pacific, we have similarities between different cultures, but when this happens, there is an erasure that is taking place. And this is where privilege comes into play, right? And although we are very similar, we still have very different experiences. Being that the Pacific Islander community is one of the fastest growing populations in the US, there is a growing disconnect from Pacific roots and distancing of Pacific peoples from one another. Being that Polynesians are the majority here in the US for Pacific Islanders, we are privileged that everything pertaining to the Pacific Islander community is solely based on the Polynesian experience, and that includes the needs of the Polynesian people. And this is the erasure I was talking about. It is taking place here, where the experience of other Pacific peoples are not being considered at all. This is why I personally do not identify as Polynesian, because I do not wish to contribute to that erasure or add on to the wedge that has formed between Polynesians and other peoples of the Pacific. And there are other things that are going on in the Pacific that mirror exactly what is going on here in the US, like racism and colorism, but because of the privilege that American born Pacific Islanders hold, it has been hard to acknowledge that such a thing can be happening. And that is the unfortunate part, that being Pacific Islander, we cannot fully see or grasp an experience outside of our own. And so even though Pacific people are known to be very caring and loving, um, it is very possible for things like our identities to be able to get in between our communities, even though our communities are already very, very small. And so I hope that these things like interpolation and privilege will not continue to separate us. If anything, I hope that it can be a unifying factor one day. And even though I no longer allow anyone to give me a reason to misidentify myself, I acknowledge my own privilege, being Polynesian in this country, in this community, and I am actively working to help lessen this gap that there is between Pacific peoples, to make sure that this erasure does not continue to happen, for future generations.